Hello and a very warm welcome to Bharata. First, you're watching Big Picture with me, Frank Pereira. Since you're here, I would like to thank you for your continued support. For those of you who haven't already subscribed, please like the video, subscribe, hit the bell icon, and then all the notifications. Do follow our social media handles for all the latest updates, and you can also subscribe to our newsletter to get some incisive content. The Bharata First team runs a Big Picture daily quiz. Please do participate by going through the description in Big Picture videos. Now, here are the UPI IDs for those of you who would like to come forward and contribute. A small contribution you make will be a giant leap for us to keep bringing you this content. So do continue to show your love and support. All the information, along with a few more recommendations, are in the description of this video. So please go through it. And now on to the discussion. At the close of the Global Health Summit, the G20 leaders on May 21st issued a joint declaration aimed at coordinating worldwide efforts against the COVID-19 pandemic. According to a press release, the G20 leaders noted that the pandemic continues to be a global health and socio-economic crisis with disproportionate direct and indirect effects on the most vulnerable as well as healthcare workers. They added that the pandemic will not be over until all countries are able to bring the disease under control, and therefore large-scale, global, safe, effective and equitable vaccination in combination with appropriate other public health measures remains the top priority. In this edition of Big Picture, we will analyze the Global Health Summit and the G20 Leaders Rome Declaration. Joining me on the program today are Major General Drusi Katoch, retired Director, India Foundation, Ashok Sajjanhar, former ambassador, and Pramit Pal Chowdhury, foreign editor of the Hindustan Times. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on this edition of Big Picture. Ambassador, let me start the program with you first. Do you believe finally that the world is coming together on one page to try and combat this pandemic? At least we have seen in the recent past that the global leaders and nations around the world are making the right kind of noises.
They are making the right kind of noises, Frank. You're very right. Coming on the same page, if it means coming out with a joint declaration, well, that also they have come out yesterday with the Rome Declaration. But I think putting their money where their mouth is, I still see that there is a lot to be desired and a lot needs to be done still. The last more than 1 year, what we have seen is basically that. Whether it was the United Nations or it was G20, it failed miserably. We know that the United Nations Security Council, it couldn't even sort of have a discussion on this issue in March of last year because China was chairing and it said that, this is not a security issue and this is a health issue. It met in April, but still because of the opposing views of two major protagonists, nothing could really be done. The G20 health summit met for the first time, took place in March of last year. But then there was no major decisions, even the decisions that were taken, let us say on debt relief, etc., nothing much really could come out of it. So we've seen that, the problem has increased. Today we have more than 3.4 million deaths that have taken place. I think the positive aspects are that we have a vaccine. So now it becomes really imperative that the vaccine should be administered to as many people as possible because as it has been repeated ad nauseum, no one is cured, no one is free till everyone has been vaccinated. And this is not the case. We have about, I think today, 1.6 billion doses have been administered. Only about 0.3% of that has been given to the low-income countries. So, no one, if the countries think that they are safe, if they have administered the vaccines to themselves, that is not true. What we have also seen during the last 1 year is in terms of the supply chains have not been very robust, have not been very resilient, have not been reliable. And that also, in terms of addressing that issue, it has not been done in a very credible manner, so to say. There has also been, we have also witnessed a great deal of vaccine nationalism. Countries, for instance, developed countries, particularly whether it is the United States, it is Canada, it is the United Kingdom, they have got vaccines about double of their population, or more than double of the population. In fact, if two doses are required, they have four times the number of the people. So vaccine nationalism has been there, and I don't see anything very significant happening in this particular meeting. The last point that I'll make is, we had India and South Africa had made a case for waiver of temporary waiver of patents, so that the vaccines can be manufactured at a much faster pace in different countries, so that they can be administered to large number of people. And here, this declaration, the Rome Declaration, completely sidesteps that issue, and it says that the production of vaccines should be increased while following the provisions on the TRIPS agreement, the trade-related aspects of intellectual property rights, as are contained in the WTO. So yes, I think there is been some movement in terms of getting more money, funding. I think we've got about under the ACT accelerator access to COVID-19 tools, and tools means, all the therapeutics, diagnostics, vaccines, and PPE kits and ventilators. So under that ACT accelerator, we have got about 14 odd billion dollars. The world, this organization needs $18 billion more. That is what they are asking for. So I think some steps have been taken, but really the initiative to be credible needs much more work to be done, Frank.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Taking this particular aspect forward, General, how serious is the world about trying to put an end to this pandemic? Because it doesn't seem like, we are very serious. The noises are being made, yes, but when it comes to action being taken on the ground, it doesn't seem so, because the pharma lobbies continue to get their way, and all of we have vaccine nationalism as well. So what do countries other than who have these vaccines really do?
Well, actually, Frank, I think this is going to remain a very serious problem, not just for the current year and perhaps stretching up to 2022, but I also see this coming up in the future also. Now, when we are looking at the big pharma firms, the fellows who are producing vaccines and all that, as per the reports today, 9 of them are the new billionaires. I mean, that is the scale of what the situation is. But when you speak to them, they give out a point of view, which I would just like to put across now. They say that when a pandemic or something like this strikes, they actually put in billions of dollars into research. And if that money does not come back, they said, okay, it doesn't come back this time. But next time, if there is a pandemic, nobody will put in that money. So where will the vaccine be? Now, that appears to be, on the face of it, a very logical assessment or an assumption. But if you look into it a bit deeper, if you're looking into what happened in the United States, the entire big pharma industry, they were actually subsidized by the United States government. So actually, such arguments fall flat. This is one. The second reason why I think these arguments don't have too much credibility is that when we are looking into a globalized world, now in this globalized world, what is happening? One, if India is impacted, and let us say India collapses, just theoretically, there are 1.3 billion people in India. If India collapses, please take it from me, the rest of the world will collapse too. We are living in a globalized world. So we are dependent on each other. Now, this dependency per se, whether it is India or Africa or Europe or the Americas, right? It doesn't really matter. We are dependent on each other, and any particular part of the world, whether it is Africa or South America or even North America, if they start going down, the impact will be felt here. And if we start going down, the impact will be felt there. So I think we need to take this. This is a very one-sided argument of intellectual property rights, because there is a larger good to it and a larger economic good to it too. Because if you don't supply the vaccine and a large portion of the world collapses, then what are you going to do with the rest of your economies? They will collapse. So I think what the nations need to do, and I'm surprised that the G20 plus I think the 12 odd international bodies, they did not seek it fit to put this into the Rome Declaration. They should have put this in. I mean, I think this is a very vital aspect. This is one. So what we really need today is a vaccine, which is cheap, affordable, and which can be sent across the world so that within a year or say a year or year and a half, if the whole world is immunized, then we are in a position actually to control this particular pandemic and then get ready for a future pandemic as and when it occurs. This is one. Number two, I think it is very important as far as each individual nation state is concerned, also to look after their own health infrastructure. Now, one of the initiatives which was taken in India, which people really laughed about, was during the present government's previous tenure, when the prime minister from the ramparts of the Red Fort actually spoke about a thing as simple as basic as toilets. Now, at that point of time, people also they thought, why is the prime minister of the country, on such an auspicious day, speaking about such elementary things as toilets? But ultimately, if anybody has carried out a study on the spread of disease, the lower strata is impacted the most by disease. And clean living habits, and toilet is a very fundamental part of that. Washing your hands is a very fundamental part of that. That reduces the incidence of disease by as high as 60 to 70%. Now, that is the actual impact on the health of the poorest segments of our society, which is why I think those initiatives are important. And the third initiative, which I think which we need to take, all individual countries, I'm talking about the middle and lower income countries, which form the majority of the globe, I think is to, the basic health infrastructure. I think these are the services which need to be actually where a great deal of money needs to be spent. Two places where money needs to be spent is education sector, as far as educating the population is concerned, and second is health. Now, the rolling on effect of both these two particular aspects is, if you concentrate on health, and I'm talking about preventive health measures. It is not that a pandemic has broken out and now you start taking action. Let us talk of preventive health, which will prevent about 70% of the disease anyway, which is a great step forward. The second one is education, because education has got, besides creating more stable families, it reduces incidences of families profligating into a family having 6 to 8 to 10 to 12 children. You see, then you start, when the education level spreads, the family size goes down. When the family size goes down, this becomes a more sustainable planet. Now, when we talk of family planning, it has got a very negative connotation, because then people start thinking of extraneous things. But the idea is that if you are educated, people realize themselves that it is in their own economic welfare to have smaller families which can be well looked after, where you can give the very best to your children. So I think as far as the developing world is concerned, they need to concentrate on preventive health, improving education levels, and health facilities. The developed world, I think at this point of time, needs to look very seriously into this IPR business for the pandemic. The vaccine must be made available. What India has recommended is to freeze IPR for say 6 to 8 months. That will actually give us the leeway to vaccinate a large proportion of the world, and yet the pharma companies can make reasonable profits. Okay, I mean, they may not get a few trillion, but they will get at least 1 or 2 trillion, as part of the big apple, part of the big pie. So this is where I think we need to concentrate on, and India will, I'm quite certain, continue to put its effort towards this end.
Absolutely. Pramit, let me bring you in now. On this issue of IPR, let's take that particular aspect forward. Initially, we saw President Joe Biden also dragging his feet on it because of all the pharma lobby back home. But the US too has now said that we need to look at temporary waivers of the IPR. India and South Africa have been pushing for it from day one, but the world doesn't seem like it's ready for it. Where do we see this going?
I don't see IPR going anywhere because, frankly, I don't think it's particularly relevant. Let's look at it this way. We, India, already have the rights to the AstraZeneca patent. We have the rights to Covaxin, which is our own production. Moderna has waived its patent rights right from the beginning. So has Johnson & Johnson. There are huge numbers of patents clearly available for anybody to use, but production of these vaccines has not taken off. And I would argue, this is in fact what the Indian government has realized, that the patents are not a major issue. The real issue is the supply chain. that there are almost 250 ingredients required to make a basic vaccine. More complicated ones like mRNA have 300 vaccines. So even if you have the patent, do you have the capacity to actually make the vaccine? The answer is no, because there are huge production issues. A simple example, to make an mRNA vaccine, there is a certain thing called a capping technology. There is one company in the world that makes that capping technology. It doesn't have the production to provide that for billions and billions of vaccines. It's very used to producing for only about 200 million a year. Suddenly it's been told we need 10 billion of them. It doesn't have the capacity to make. In fact, if you go to even the AstraZeneca, this is one of the reasons why Adar Poonawalla was begging Biden. He didn't ask for a patent waiver. He said, give me the production, the supply chains for 37 ingredients. Bharat Biotech didn't ask for a patent waiver. They said, give me one chemical, an adjuvant, a booster thing that comes out of, it's produced by one company in the middle of Kansas. They said, just give me that. That's all I need, and I can mass produce vaccines. The problem that we face, which is why the Indian government, while it's saying, yes, patents have some utility, they're getting a waiver, the real issue is supply chain management. That's why the foreign minister is flying to America right now, today, because his job, and then when he went to the G7 foreign ministers meeting, his job was to say, look, telling the Americans, patents is fine. You want to do that, that's fine. But what I really need is for you to prioritize India under the US Defense Production Act and allow Indian companies to get these huge, these supply chain issues. There are 30 countries around the world which produce the components, and this includes even glass. For example, the borosilicate that's used for vaccine is produced by one company in Germany. That's the real problem that we're facing right now, is that we simply don't have the production capacity. We have lots of patents lying around which are free to use. And a lot of the companies in the world have said, you want to take it, it doesn't make any difference because you don't have the supply chain to manage it. I should add that Pfizer doesn't control its own patent. It's actually controlled by BioNTech, and the core vaccines, or the core patents for mRNA technology of BioNTech are actually controlled by the University of Pennsylvania, which invented mRNA vaccines in the first place. All of them have said, take the patent, we don't care. It doesn't make any difference, they know that. So the real issue is supply chain and production. That's what Quad, you saw India convincing the other Quad members, put in some money and we can add 1 billion doses of Johnson & Johnson, but that's coming out next year. Now we need to get other countries to start putting up money and allowing that supply chain to expand. There you run into a major geopolitical problem, which is the American and to some degree, some of the European supply chains do not want to integrate with China. Chinese supply chain is independent of the rest of the world. It imports some parts and components, but they fear, one, reverse engineering. The Chinese just basically just say, oh, well, we'll take it from you, but now we're going to make it ourselves at half the price and drive you off the market, but we won't give you any patents, nothing. And second, that the Chinese, basically their quality control isn't so hot, so there's a lot of concerns that you'll end up with problems on that front. But even the Russian Sputnik requires components from the United States, from Germany, from Sweden, Korea, Japan. All of these countries provide the components. So you need to work out that more than anything else. And that's exactly what a lot of our diplomatic effort right now at the G7, at the Quad level, at the bilateral level, is about supply chain, open up the supply chains, and where the supply chain is simply too small, you have, as I said, tiny companies being forced to produce well beyond their capacities, go in there and say, okay, let's set up a fund, give them some money, and expand the production. Because these guys are not, they have to spend time going to a bank saying, give me a loan, let me start manufacturing this, go through the insurance policy. The pandemic will go on for another 5 years. So you need to do this on a war footing, but you need international cooperation to get this going.
Absolutely. That's a very valid point there raised by Pramit. Let me take that forward with you, Ambassador. So, how do we sort this out? Because clearly, this is something that we've been talking about for a while now. It's not something new. We knew about it. We knew about it when the pandemic hit us as well. And that's why like-minded countries decided to come together. We have the supply chain resilience initiative with Japan and Australia as well. But it's not going to happen immediately. What can be done in the immediate near future? And do we need to continue to work with like-minded nations to try and get these supply chains and look at new supply chains as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I think what the Rome Declaration also speaks about is resilient and reliable and open and transparent supply chains. And we know what has happened as far as the supply chains are concerned. Right at the beginning of the pandemic, that they were definitely not trustworthy. There was definitely no transparency. There was no reliability. In fact, so much so that we also saw the weaponization of the supply chains. That what China had said, that we are not going to supply you with these masks or with these ventilators unless when some countries started demanding that we need to get to the origin of the virus. And I think that is another question that the world has been losing sight of. I think that's a very important element also. Because unless you know what is the origin of the virus, right now you have a vaccine. Some of them, like the Chinese vaccine, it has not been approved by the WHO. Its efficacy might be about 50%. Others are 70%, 80%. AstraZeneca is maybe 90%. Covaxin is also 90%. But the point is, we have not got any cure as far as COVID-19 is concerned. These are just vaccines to take care, to provide you with a shield, but there is no definitive cure or preventive as far as this is concerned. And unless you get to know what is the origin of the virus, how did it come about, there are increasing voices now that maybe it has originated from a laboratory. Of course, from the former US administration, we've been hearing this for a long time. But I think now a large number of scientists around the world have come around to this view that we need to get a thorough, transparent, open, independent investigation into the origin of the virus. And that is essential, not only for what is available, how you deal with the virus today, how you deal with the current COVID-19 virus, but any other future pandemics that might come about. That also is, you'll be able to deal, the world will be able to deal with it and will be ready for it, in a much better way. Allow me, Frank, to just add a couple of thoughts on this whole issue of the patents. Because you see, the point is that here Serum Institute of India has the patent for manufacturing AstraZeneca Oxford. It doesn't mean that that patent can be shared by him with any other company in India to manufacture the same. No, the patent is with him. As far as Bharat Biotech is concerned, also they are the ones who manufactured. They have got the patents. They can license this to some others, and they can start and they can ramp up the production. I take the point that after all, the production facilities need to be, if they need to be established, if they need to be worked up, it might take some time. But maybe it is not going to take all that much of time. And why do I say that is, it might take a few months, definitely, because when you have Dr. Reddy's getting Sputnik V from Russia, it is not that it's going to take them a year to set up the facilities. They are importing all these facilities, all these vaccines, which are going to be supplied, but within a month or 2 months, they are going to have their own manufacture within the country, and they are going to ramp up the production of that. There are other countries also, I know, definitely in Central Asia. For instance, Kazakhstan has bought a large number of Sputnik V from Russia, but they have also set up their own manufacturing facilities. That having been said, getting patents waiver, meaning it is, number one, it's not a very simple thing. Since I have spent several years in the WTO and I know how these things work, and we know that the European Union is not at all keen about it. They are very, because a large number of the pharma companies are there in Germany, are there in France. So they are very reluctant to go in for this waiver. So even if they were to come on board, the exact crossing the T's and dotting the I's is going to take a long time. And once that is done, once you get the patents, then the production facilities, and then the supply chains. So it's not going to be that you get your patent, if it is approved tomorrow, then day after tomorrow you can start production. Not at all. That is why some of these, even in the Rome Declaration, I think it is mentioned that you go down the path of compulsory licensing. That means if you find that a company is not manufacturing what it is required to, what it is committed to, then the government can take over and compulsorily license, give that technology to others so that they can also start manufacturing. So I
Sure.
think there are many sort of slips between the cup and the lip as we go forward. But going down this temporary waiver of the patent, it might be a good thing, but it is not going to yield results very, very quickly, even if the waivers are obtained.
Absolutely. General, I'd like to take this aspect of the origin of the virus forward with you. There are several scientists and several analysts, experts who have come and spoken about it now. Now we've seen the voices grow off late, at least over the last couple of weeks. Some world leaders who have come forward and spoken about it too. But I don't think there is enough noise that is being made about it, because there's a lot of science to this as well. If we know the origin, it becomes easier to deal with the pandemic and look at future pandemics too. Do you believe that the world needs to go after this a little more strongly?
Frank, I think we should have done that last year itself. You see, right at the end of 2019, when the pandemic first appeared in China. And unfortunately, at that point of time, the head of the WHO, he himself actually sided with the Chinese, which I thought was a very retrograde step. Now, when we look into the nature of any virus, and this I've got from a whole lot of my from my colleagues who are in this profession, you see, a natural virus mutates in a certain way. And let us say if it has been brought up in a temperature of, say, 10 to 20 degrees, it generally that is the climate in which that virus survives. Now, if you take a virus which is a natural virus, which is in that, which originated in the 10 to 20 degrees centigrade range, uh, and you transpose it into an environment like India, which is in the 35 to 40-degree range, the chances of that virus multiplying is actually very low. Now, when we are looking into this particular virus, you see temperatures and climate, etc., are not making a difference. Which is why the thought process was that this is a virus which has originated from a lab, and in Wuhan there are a very large number of laboratories which are actually devoted to this. So the very first report which we got was that there was a case that the leak has taken place from a laboratory, and then of course they made the story of it coming out from that from where they sell fish, etc., etc. That of course was a cover up. So in my view, the likelihood of this being a virus which has originated from the lab is very high, and that is why it is important, if you know how that virus was created and why it was created, then making the countermeasures becomes that much simpler. The second point to this is, of course, when people say that, they said, okay, if China has created that virus, why do they not have the antidote? Because even today, the Chinese virus is not a very trusted, I beg your pardon, the Chinese vaccination is not a very trusted vaccination. And if they were first of the block, because they should have been working on the vaccination alongside the virus, right? Seriously working on it. Their virus should have been ready before their vaccination should have been ready before the virus leaked out. Now, that evidently has not happened, as we saw of the large number of casualties which took place in Wuhan itself in 2019 and early part of 2020. So the question is, why not? Now, here I tend to believe, it is my belief, and I really have no data to back it up. I think it could have been an accidental leak. It is not something which the Chinese did deliberately. But I feel that perhaps if it was an accidental leak which came out from a laboratory, then seeing the nature of the Chinese polity, obviously they will cover it up. You see, I mean, the Chinese are very firm believers in faith, and if they feel, if the world comes to know that from their facilities a leak like this has taken place, they lose a large part of credibility, which they won't like. So they, in my view, they covered it up. If had it not been covered up, I think a very large portion of the casualties which have taken place across the world could have been sort of tackled in a relatively much easier manner. Now it has spread to points, and if we get to phase three, or we even don't know what's going to lie beyond. There are certain people who are saying that even after you take your vaccines, you may have to get vaccinated every year. So obviously, the big pharma companies, for them, it is going to be a bonanza. Are they also involved in it? We don't know. So the data availability as of now is very low, precisely because the Chinese have not permitted any information to flow out, and they have restricted access to what they have. So in my personal view, I think this is an accidental outflow of a biological weapon from a laboratory in Wuhan. Otherwise, you do not see the virus mutating in different temperature ranges the way it has mutated in various parts across the globe. Right.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Pramit, let me come back to you now. A word on this first and foremost. Do you believe that we'll ever know the truth? Because organizations like the WHO, like the general just pointed out, did not seem like they wanted to push for it in the beginning, and now it seems like it's too late. That is one. Secondly, of course, where does this leave the pharma companies, and where does it leave countries like India?
Well, on the issue of the source of the virus, it'll be very difficult for us to find out. We've seen the WHO has sent teams, and the Chinese have effectively blocked it. They've from actually accessing anything close to where the virus seems to have originated from. In China itself, those who have attempted to investigate, those who have commented on it, who have blogged about it, have all been arrested. Many of them have disappeared. The chances of us finding out are very, very remote. The only hope really is that, as has happened in China in the past, for example, in the case of the so-called Tiananmen Square papers, and the corruption of Xi Jinping's personal family, people within the party, normally from factions that are presumably hostile to the ruling faction, leak those papers, leak documents out to the wider world. So hopefully that may happen at some point. On just building on General Katocha's point, if you read the interviews given by Matt Pottinger, who was a deputy national security advisor for Trump and one of the sanest people in the Trump administration, and a person who speaks fluent Mandarin himself, he said that in one of his interviews, he said near the end of my term with the Trump government administration, when I would ask my Chinese friends, both journalists and officials, this came, and I'd say that, this came out of a lab in China. You let it out by mistake, did you? Or was it deliberate? He says they wouldn't even bother to deny anything anymore. They just wouldn't even answer. They would just look at the floor or up at the ceiling. And he said the Chinese privately stopped even trying to deny that it came out of a lab. And I think the recent study by the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists, or Federation of American Scientists, had a very comprehensive article looking at all the data, 80,000 data points regarding the genomic sequencing of the virus, and said there's almost no evidence for zoonotic transfer. In other words, natural transfer. None of them show natural transfer of the virus, which would only indicate that there's only one other option, which is it's man-made. Regarding as to where we go now, basically India is now trying, and I think the Quad was the beginning of that process, to develop a cooperative structure to persuade America, some of the European countries, maybe Russia, to say, look, we have to work together to get a solution. If each of us try to do it independently, it will fail because the supply chain structure of vaccines doesn't allow it. It's one of the reasons India will definitely not take the compulsory licensing route, because that will trigger an enormous reaction from the pharma industry in America and the US Congress. And any hope of cooperation with America will end immediately. And I know internally it's already been rejected by the government. So what you need to do is persuade the Americans. And that's, I think we're getting pretty good traction on that front. That, look, this is a global problem. The Biden administration is all about restoring America's credibility at the international front. We have the capacity to manufacture at incredibly low prices. If you ensure that the supply chain works, if we get funding, we get the technology access, we can then solve this problem by simply manufacturing billions and billions of vaccines. It's a cooperative venture. It's the only way forward, and that's exactly diplomatically what we're working at. And I think we'll see some progress on that at the G7 summit. And you saw Biden has already given a speech where he's talked about America being the arsenal of vaccines, which is sort of going back to Franklin Delano Roosevelt's comment in World War II that America would be the arsenal of democracy and to preserve the world against Nazism. So this is the basic, I think, thesis that's being put forward now. And I think we'll see, from my hearing, we'll see a lot of progress on that front. But if we decide to take unilateral actions, that will be the end of that process. And I can assure you that we will not be able to produce even one vaccine in India because not even Bharat Biotech can make it without inputs imported from other countries.
Absolutely. All right. Time to get quick closing comments now from all my panelists for the best way forward, starting first with you, Ambassador.
Well, two comments, on the discussion we've had so far. I agree that compulsory licensing is not under consideration. You would recall that even the Supreme Court had told the center that why don't you go in for compulsory licensing? And I think the government has decided, and very rightly so in my view, that compulsory licensing is not the way, and we have to go and work out in terms of cooperation and collaboration with all our partners. We have this resilient supply chain initiative, and I think different countries, whether it is at G7, G7 plus 3, all these need to get together. But they really need to get together to push back against China, because that is the only way in which China will get affected, in which China will feel some sort of pain. The second comment, Frank, that I'd like to make at this time is, we are talking about the origin of the virus in this program. And in this, if China had nothing to hide, I'm sure it would have welcomed an investigation that you come see what is there. And, if it has come out from the wet market or something, fine. But obviously, it has had something to hide. That is why even the murmur, even the whisper of an investigation sort of, really throws it into huge, rage bouts. So we've seen it against Australia, we've seen it against Europe. So obviously, it now this is no evidence. This is only circumstantial that they have the hands are not clear. But right now, I think there is increased interest in this, and it needs to be pursued. And of course, on the positive side, we need to work out with all our partners in terms of making the supply chains resilient and credible and trustworthy.
Absolutely. General?
Right, Frank, I've just got two comments to make. One is, internationally, I think we need to go on both paths. You see, you cannot say that IPR is not important and only the supply chain is important. I think both are important, and Pramit's point is very well taken. Now, this requires international cooperation as far as the supply chain is concerned, because there's IPR involved there too. Those people won't like to, if they've got a monopoly over something, they won't like to lose it because they've invested a lot of money in that particular monopoly. But we require international cooperation for that. We require both to work both on the IPR and the supply chain issues. I think for India, now specifically I want to talk about India, I think our biggest problem is our discordant voices which keep coming up in our polity. When the vaccine was being made and we said, okay, we are going to make it very quickly, you find a whole range of voices saying, why are you hurrying up with the vaccine? Now we've got the vaccine. They said, why are you taking it? It is not safe. Now people realize it is safe. They say, okay, why aren't you giving it to children also? Now, you see, it doesn't work that way. I think as a nation, we need to be more sensitive to what exactly is happening in the country, what are the challenges. And we cannot have senior political leaders of various political hues talking in a language which discredits the country. I think this is something which I really don't know how it's going to work out, but this is something which I think all political parties need to be a bit more responsive to. Otherwise, the image of the country goes down. Frank.
Absolutely. And Pramit, close the show for us with your concluding remarks.
So I think the game right now, of course, we have to ride out the present second wave that we're facing, and hopefully, where it seems that only by about mid-July will we start to see vaccine numbers start to rise in sufficient numbers for us to really look at vaccinating a large enough part of our population. So right now, social discipline. Some degree medication, but I think really social discipline and providing things like beds and oxygen will have to be our primary line of defense. But this virus's mutations are so rapid. There are now 7,000 mutations in India alone. We will keep facing wave after wave of attacks, maybe not as severe as this one. And vaccines will have to be continuously changed and tweaked to handle these new viruses. The World Health Organization calculates that the world will need something on the lines of 10 to 11 billion vaccines just to fight off the present pandemic. And then every year we may require booster doses, in which case we're looking at another 4 to 5 billion a year. Right now, we don't have the capacity. It's highly fragmented supply chain structure, as I've mentioned. The prices are all over the place. We don't have anything close to a coordinated global response. That's what needs to be done, because the virus is not going to go away, and it will keep coming back every year for possibly 5 to 10 years. And we have to prepare for that eventuality. And that, as I said before, requires incredible global cooperation, which is something we're only starting now to be putting together.
All right, gentlemen, we'll have to leave it at that. Thank you so much for joining me on the program and putting things into perspective for us. What's coming out of this discussion is that the G20 is making the right kind of noises on patent waivers and other issues, but have not acted very productively. IPR is a big concern, but a bigger issue is the availability of raw materials that are required for the production of vaccines. We have to work with like-minded partners to get the required raw materials. Resilient supply chains will also have to be created to move away from China. We also have to take note of the fact that the virus is mutating at an alarming rate, so the present vaccines may not always work. They have to be tweaked every now and then. At current levels, we need around 12 billion doses of vaccines and may need about 5 billion more booster doses. So the virus isn't going anywhere. We need global cooperation, and we need to come together as one to defeat the pandemic. Once again, thank you for your continued support. For those of you who haven't already subscribed, please like the video, subscribe, hit the bell icon, and then all notifications. Do follow our social media handles for all the latest updates, and you can also subscribe to our newsletter to get some incisive content. The Bharata First team runs a daily Big Picture quiz. Please do participate by going through the description in the Big Picture videos. Here are the UPI IDs for those of you who would like to come forward and contribute. A small contribution you make will be a giant leap for us to keep bringing you this content. So do continue to show your love and support. All this information, along with a few more recommendations, are in the description of this video. So please go through it. That's it from me. See you again next time.